When Illyra, a reclusive illustrator, escapes to an isolated cabin to find peace, she stumbles into a vast forest that doesn't follow natural laws. The trees whisper, shadows rearrange paths, and memories bleed into reality. As she ventures deeper, the forest seems to awaken something buried inside her, a haunting presence tethered to her past. Each step forward leads not only into the unknown woods but into her own fractured mind. The trees stood impossibly still. Illyra had been staring at them for nearly an hour from the dusty window of the cabin. Not a single leaf stirred. No breeze brushed through the branches. The forest surrounding her was too still, like it was holding its breath. She hadn't come here for fear. Quite the opposite. Her therapist had suggested isolation somewhere natural, quiet, far from the static of the city and the noise inside her head. A friend had mentioned this old cabin buried deep in a forgotten forest, a place with no cell service, no roads, and no neighbors for miles. Illyra thought that was perfect. But now that she was here, something felt off. The cabin creaked too often for something unoccupied. The wind didn't seem to reach the clearing. At night, faint sounds came from the trees, not animals or insects, but something softer. Almost breathing. She stepped outside. The air was heavy. Still warm from late autumn, but thick with silence. Even the birds were missing. Illyra slung her sketchpad under one arm and walked toward the woods, determined to shake off the irrational nerves clawing at her chest. As she passed the first line of trees, a chill brushed over her skin. It wasn't temperature. It was something else. The first few steps were fine. Dirt path, broken twigs, the crunch of dry leaves underfoot. Then she heard it. Not a sound. A lack of sound. Like the moment you realize the music has stopped. And something is listening. She turned, half expecting to see someone behind her. Nothing. But the trees now seemed closer. Denser. She hadn't noticed the way the bark twisted in knots, like closed eyes. Or the way the roots curled above the ground, gnarled like knuckles. There was no trail anymore. Just green. Endless, quiet green. A branch creaked above. Not swayed, creaked, as if something shifted its weight up there. Illyra tried to turn back, only to find that the way behind her was not the way she came. The clearing was gone. The trees were different. The path was wrong. Her breath caught. She spun slowly in place. No landmarks. Just woods. She wasn't far from the cabin. 10 minutes, maybe. But distance had shifted, somehow. The forest was folding around her. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't lost, just turned around. If she walked in a straight line, she'd find the clearing. She moved. The silence was thicker now. Like walking underwater. Her feet crunched loudly on the ground, the only sound. Every step echoed too loudly. She heard her own breathing. The scratch of her sleeve. The thump of her heart. Then she noticed something ahead. A small tree, no more than waist high, standing alone in a perfectly round patch of moss. It was carved. Not by weather or animal but scratched, over and over, with symbols. Lines. Spirals. Tiny humanoid figures, eyes scratched out. She knelt, tracing one with her fingertip. And felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. It wasn't physical. It was memory. Something old. Something hidden. A face her mother's smiling too tightly in a photograph. A silence after a door slammed. A child standing in a room where no one listened. She blinked. The images vanished. Illyra stood, backing away from the tree. And then, very faintly, a whisper. Not spoken, but felt. As if the forest had inhaled through her ears. You brought it with you. Illyra stumbled back, heart thudding. The voice wasn't real. It was her imagination. Residue from dreams. The cabin was probably making her paranoid. Maybe it was a form of anxiety hallucination born from silence. But when she turned again, the forest had changed. The trees around her were now all marked with carvings. Hundreds. Spirals, names, tiny open mouths. Every tree was watching. And the silence began to pulse. Like something breathing just beneath the surface of the world. Illyra didn't scream. She simply began to walk deeper into the forest. Because somehow, she knew. The only way out was through. Illyra didn't know how long she had been walking. Time didn't behave here. The shadows beneath the trees never shifted, no matter how many steps she took. The sky above was the same shade of muted gray, a kind of light that didn't come from the sun. Her phone had died earlier, though she couldn't remember using it. The screen flickered once with static before going black. It didn't matter. There was no signal anyway. What did matter were the marks. The carvings. They were everywhere now. Etched into bark, scratched into rocks, written in patterns across fallen leaves. They followed her, or perhaps led her. She could no longer tell which. What disturbed her most wasn't the symbols. It was that she recognized some of them. From old notebooks. Doodles she made as a teenager, sketching without thinking. Strange shapes drawn during sleepless nights, in the corners of her school books. Symbols she never understood, but that had felt familiar even then. How could they be here? She passed through a narrow grove of trees. Their trunks were blackened, as if struck by fire long ago, but there was no ash, no smell of burning. As she walked between them, the air grew cooler, not colder, but quieter. Thicker. It wasn't silence. It was memory. She felt it rise in her chest, unbidden. A memory of lying awake in bed at age 9, listening to her parents argue behind a closed door. The words were muffled, but the tone carried through the sharpness, the breaks in speech, the sudden, terrifying quiet that followed. Illyra froze in the grove. She heard it again. A voice. Her mother's. Don't go into the woods. Don't listen to them. But her mother had never said that, had she? She couldn't tell anymore. The memory didn't feel like hers. Or maybe it was one she had discarded. Something the forest was giving back. The trees here didn't just stand. They remembered. Ahead, the ground sloped downward into a shallow depression, a clearing shaped like an open palm. In its center stood a wooden structure. Not a house. Not a shrine. A door frame, standing alone. No walls. No hinges. No knob. Just the frame, made of rotting wood, tangled with vines and moss. A doorway to nothing. Illyra stepped closer. There was something written across the top beam in faded charcoal, only what you carry may pass through. She didn't understand. She reached out. Her fingers brushed the frame and the ground shuddered beneath her. Not an earthquake. A tremor of thought. Like the forest itself was remembering something through her. Suddenly she was standing in her childhood kitchen. Not really, the forest hadn't disappeared. But her mind was filled with it, projecting into the trees around her. Cabinet handles became memories. Floorboards became echoing footsteps. The scent of old wood turned into the smell of lemon cleaner. And the voice again. Her father's this time. Low, calm, too calm, you're too sensitive, Illyra. You imagine things that aren't there. Her fists clenched. Her breath hitched. The forest took that emotion. It fed on it. The doorframe pulsed, as if inviting her in. But she didn't step through. Instead, she turned back and the clearing was gone. Replaced by tall, crooked trees. Branches like arms. Roots like ropes. And far ahead, something moved. Not an animal. Not human. A shape. Pale and slow, just beyond focus. It didn't chase. It didn't stalk. It simply watched. And when Illyra blinked, it was closer. Not by feet. Not by space. But by understanding. It wasn't trying to reach her. It was already inside. Illyra stumbled away, deeper into the trees. But now, the forest was changing. Paths that weren't there before opened like unfolding paper. Rocks shifted behind her. Each step sounded softer. And the wind began to whisper not in words, but in feelings. Fear. Loneliness. Grief. Emotions she had buried long ago, now written into the trees like ink on a diary page. The forest didn't just know her. It had read her. And it was leading her somewhere. In the distance, a bell rang once. Faint. Hollow. Like the end of a school day or a warning. She kept walking. Because she knew the forest wasn't done. And neither was she. The further Illyra walked, the more the forest changed. It was no longer just trees and moss and twisted paths. Now, it was architecture not made of stone or brick, but of shadow and memory. Tree trunks arranged in the shape of forgotten hallways. Roots curling upward into arches, like cathedral ceilings. Leaves falling in patterns too precise to be random. She realized, with a slow, sick understanding, that she wasn't walking through a forest anymore. She was walking through her mind. It began with the sound. A humming. Low, droning. Not coming from any one direction, but from all around, inside the trees, inside the earth, and somehow, inside her chest. It grew louder the deeper she went. The trees began to whisper again, not with words, but tones. A language made of tension. Every sound brushed against something inside her that she hadn't touched in years. The forest was talking. Not to her. About her. Illyra stopped in a place where the ground split open, a long, narrow ravine filled with fallen branches and rotting leaves. There was a bridge, made of bark and vines, stretching across. Beneath it, a slow mist crawled through the split earth like breath exhaled in sleep. As she stepped onto the bridge, the humming stopped. Silence. And then, do you remember the basement? A whisper, not from the air, but from beneath her skin. Illyra froze. That voice had no sound, but it vibrated behind her eyes. The basement. She didn't want to remember it. She sealed it off. Like a door bolted from the outside. But now it cracked open. She was 12 again, in a house with thin walls and thick silence. Her room had a corner that always felt wrong. Not haunted, just off. The air heavier. The shadows longer. And the basement was beneath it. She used to hear things from down there. Not footsteps. Breathing. Like something asleep that dreamed of her. Her parents never believed her. Called her dramatic. called her tired, locked the door and told her to forget it. But she hadn't forgotten. The forest knew that now. Illyra reached the other side of the bridge. Ahead, the trees opened into a wide glade, a circular space with no wind, no sound, no life. At the center was a stump, smooth and clean like it had been carved deliberately. The bark was stripped, the wood bone white. Something lay on it. She approached slowly. It was a journal. Her journal. She hadn't seen it since she was 16. The one she used to write in late at night, under her covers. The one she had thrown into the river the day she decided to forget everything. But here it was. Pages dry. Words intact. She picked it up. And the forest shivered. She opened it, and the pages turned themselves. Not with wind. But intention. Each page showed a memory she didn't write. Not drawings. Not writing. Scenes. Her mother's face, eyes hollowed by sadness. The silhouette of a man standing in her bedroom doorway. The dream of a forest she thought she imagined as a child. She dropped the journal, it vanished the moment it hit the ground. And something behind her laughed. Not loudly. Just a single, dry chuckle like bark cracking in winter. She turned, but there was no one. Only trees. But their shadows looked wrong. Not cast by the light. Cast by thought. She ran not from something, but from understanding. Because she knew, finally, that the forest wasn't hunting her. It was showing her. Drawing out pieces she had buried so deeply, she forgot they existed. This place wasn't cursed. It was a mirror. And it was alive. She stumbled through another patch of bramble, cut stinging her skin not from thorns, but from memory. And ahead of her, a light. A soft, golden glow that shimmered between the trunks. Not fire. Not sun. A door. Just like the one before. Freestanding. Waiting. But this time, something stood beside it. A figure. Her. Not a reflection. Not a memory. A version of herself, young, wide-eyed, mouth sewn shut by silence she never chose. They stared at each other. And the forest breathed. Illyra stood frozen. The figure beside the glowing door looked like her but younger. Maybe 8, maybe 9. Dressed in a faded sweatshirt, sleeves too long, hair tangled and eyes wide with the quiet ache of a child who had learned not to speak unless spoken to. But it wasn't just a memory. It was present. Alive. Breathing. The girl didn't move. She only stared, unblinking, as though waiting for permission to exist. Illyra stepped forward. The forest pulsed with emotion so thick it made her knees buckle. Grief. Not loud or wailing but deep, old grief. The kind that becomes part of your bones. The grief of being unseen. Of being unheard. The girl tilted her head, as if reading her thoughts. And in that still moment, Illyra remembered, the first time she'd drawn the forest. She had been 8. Alone in her room. The house quiet in that oppressive way that only happens after an argument too loud to forget. She had drawn trees, hundreds of them, curling into each other, branches like fingers, roots like ropes. No sky. No path. Just forest, pressing inward. And in the center of the page, a small girl standing at a door with no house. She thought she had imagined it. But the forest had been waiting ever since. The child Illyra raised one hand and pointed toward the door. It shimmered. Not with light. With memory. Illyra stepped closer, and the world trembled. The door opened not outward, not inward, but into her. She was pulled through. Not by force. By knowing. On the other side was not another part of the forest. It was a room. Her childhood bedroom. Exactly as it had been, the pale walls, the sagging mattress, the dent in the closet door from the time she de-kicked it in frustration. The smell of old paper, dust, and something sweetly rotten like flowers left too long in water. It wasn't real. But it was true. She heard it again, the breathing. Soft. Patient. Not angry. Not kind. Like something that didn't need to hunt her because it already owned her. From beneath the floorboards. She looked down. The wood moved subtly, as if someone paced slowly underneath. A whisper rose, not words. A sound made of emotion. Regret. Fear. Longing. And then a single sentence formed inside her head, "You left me here." Illyra's chest tightened. It wasn't the forest speaking. It was her. The part of her she abandoned. The memories she suppressed to survive. The girl who cried in silence and drew forests instead of speaking pain. The parts of her mind that curled inward for safety and never came out again. This wasn't a haunting. It was a reunion. The younger version of herself stepped beside her, silent. They stood together in the room that wasn't real but always was. The floor creaked again. Something rose beneath it. Not a monster. Not a ghost. Just a shape, a suggestion of presence. The form of fear itself. Undefined, shadowed, formless. And yet, Illyra knew it. It had no name, but it had always been with her. In the corners of her mind. In her hesitation to speak, in the numbness after she cried. She dropped to her knees, shaking. And whispered, "I remember." The room fell completely still. The floor stopped moving. The figure below did not vanish. But it rested. As though hearing her acknowledgement was enough. The younger Illyra placed a hand on her shoulder. For the first time, Illyra looked into her own eyes, those old eyes that had seen too much, too soon. She said, softly, "You can come with me now." And the child nodded. The room began to unravel. Not fall apart, release. The walls folded into themselves. The ceiling dissolved into sky. The bed melted into shadow. And the door ahead opened not into more rooms but into forest. Real forest. Bright. Not safe but honest. Illyra stepped through, the child now part of her again. The forest was still vast. Still echoing. But it no longer felt like a trap. It felt like a place she had built for herself, to hold what no one else could hold. And now she was ready to leave it. Not to forget. But to carry it. A trail appeared. Winding gently uphill, toward a pale light far above. For the first time, she walked without fear. The forest whispered behind her, not threatening, but grateful. "Thank you for remembering." And she whispered back, "Thank you for waiting." Illyra climbed the path in silence. The trees no longer reached for her. They stood tall and still, like solemn sentinels witnessing a passing ritual. The light ahead was soft, not blinding, not harsh. It pulsed gently, as if breathing. A calm heartbeat at the forest's edge. She felt lighter with every step. Not free, never that. But known. She carried the forest inside her now, not as a prison, but as a memory returned to its rightful place. As she neared the light, the landscape began to change. The trees grew wider apart, revealing fragments of places she'd long since forgotten, the blue-tiled floor of her childhood kitchen, the flicker of an old TV screen, the corner of a library she used to hide in after school. These weren't visions. They were offerings. The forest was returning her to herself, piece by piece. She reached a clearing that pulsed with quiet breath. At its center stood a pool of still water, mirror-like and perfectly round. There was no wind here. No sound. Only the slow rhythm of something ending. Illyra approached the edge. In the reflection, she saw herself. Not the version who walked into the forest. Not the frightened girl she used to be. Someone in between. Someone whole. But the reflection wasn't still. Something else moved behind her, not in the real world, only in the water. A shadow. Shapeless, like grief made visible. She didn't flinch this time. She didn't run. She knelt beside the pool, placed her hand gently on the surface and whispered, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The surface broke, but not with water. With release. The forest exhaled. Branches groaned gently. Leaves fluttered upward as though gravity had reversed. The sky, long hidden, opened in a soft bloom of starlight, pale and unfamiliar. For the first time, she saw the true color of the night sky here. It was silver. Not like metal. Like memory. She stood again and turned. The forest behind her had changed. It looked peaceful. Still vast. Still unknowable. But no longer watching. No longer needing her. It had let go. And now so could she. A final path revealed itself. Stone steps, half hidden in moss, leading upward through a tunnel of white trees. Their bark shimmered like frost, though the air was warm. As she walked, she felt the presence of those she had once been. Not ghostly figures. Not visions. But echoes. Illyra at 5, hiding behind her mother's skirt. Illyra at 14, scribbling in her journal by flashlight. Illyra at 17, standing at the edge of a bridge, wondering if she would ever feel real. Each version stood along the path, not blocking it but blessing it. She met each gaze. And each one nodded. At the top of the path, she found the final door. Not wooden. Not rotten. It was made of light. Of silence. Of memory. She didn't hesitate. She stepped through. On the other side, there was no sudden clarity. No triumphant music. No bright awakening. Only a quiet room. A real one. A hospital, maybe. A shelter, a place that smelled of clean linens and new paper. She was lying in a bed, surrounded by soft beeping, white walls and a window cracked open to let in the wind. A nurse walked by and paused. Smiled faintly. "You're awake," she said. Illyra didn't respond. She was still returning. It would take time. To explain. To understand. To speak again. But she had walked through herself and survived. Not cleansed. But claimed. Outside the window, a forest swayed gently in the wind. And deep in its roots, a door closed softly. Waiting again. Not with hunger. But with hope.